Cold War tensions were also felt back home, away from the fighting. The societies of Europe and America changed radically during the Cold War years. Gender roles were heavily impacted by this change. Men that had fought in World War II returned home disillusioned with war and fighting, just as they had after the First World War. However, this time around, governments ensured the soldiers' transition back to civilian society went as smoothly as possible. Government subsidized unemployment and college tuition programs allowed ex-combatants to pursue productive lives as civilians. Frustrated young men continued to exist, but rather than join radical political organizations such as the Nazi or fascist parties, these angry young men enrolled in urban gangs or joined the rock and roll revolution. Although its roots were in African American blues and jazz, rock and roll only became a mass phenomenon with the growing popularity of a white man, Elvis Presley. Incidentally, in the heavily censored 1950s, rockin' and rollin' was a euphemism for having sex. And Elvis was initially known as Elvis the Pelvis because of the outrage his gyrating hips caused among conservative social groups. Women also experienced a shift in gender roles. As you might remember, during World War II, women took over factory jobs of men who went off to fight. Women played a critical role in the war efforts of all combatant countries. After the war, men returned home and wanted their jobs back. Women then were expected to go back to their more traditional roles of domestic queen. This move was encouraged by the appearance of fashion that accentuated the quote-unquote feminine qualities of women. Christian Dior, for example, invented a new look for women based on a tight waistline that opened up to a wide skirt. The curvy silhouette was emphasized by very pointy brassieres. Another element of this glorification of the domestic woman was the development of new appliances such as the modern refrigerator, the toaster oven, the steam iron, and the vacuum cleaner that facilitated domestic work. Notice the woman in the image is happily doing work while wearing high heels. Nevertheless, the ultimate reality of post-war society was that men and women increasingly coincided at work. Women had become accustomed to being in the workplace and did not so easily accept returning to subservient roles in the household. Ultimately, though, Cold War society was a society that lived with a very real prospect of nuclear war. In the United States, many families, especially those in the developing suburbs, built bomb shelters in their backyards. As you can see in the Life magazine cover on the right, there was a very real concern with surviving a nuclear attack. Look at the man on the cover wearing a thin plastic suit. The plastic provided little protection from nuclear radiation, but thousands of families bought similar suits in hopes that it would help them survive the impending nuclear holocaust. The early Cold War years also incited a Red Scare in America, a fear that communist spies were plotting against the United States from within the country's borders. The movement to eradicate such a threat was spearheaded by Senator Joseph McCarthy from Wisconsin, who used the House Committee on Un-American Activities to lead a communist witch hunt. Prominent and not so prominent Americans were brought before the committee and asked if they had ever been members of the Communist Party. Though almost all denied any involvement with communism, and there was little actual proof of any involvement, McCarthy succeeded in blacklisting many of them, forcing them out of their jobs and shaming them in public. The government also passed an Internal Security Act that stifled freedom of speech rights by landing in jail anyone who was caught openly criticizing the government. Yet the Cold War also witnessed very positive changes in American society. In the 1950s and 60s, the Civil Rights Movement pushed the United States government to put an end to ethnic segregation. The process of legislative change started in 1954 with the landmark court case Brown versus Board of Education that ended segregation in public schools. Perhaps the most visible leader of the movement was Martin Luther King, a Southern minister made famous by his "I Have a Dream" speech, in which he called for true equality among all American ethnic groups. The Civil Rights Movement also inspired the strong women's movement of the 1960s and 70s. The demand for equality for women was exemplified by Betty Friedan's 1963 book, The Feminine Mystique, in which she voiced the very real torment suffered by women in a male-dominant society. You can see a picture of Betty here on the left. 10 years later, another landmark Superior Court case, Roe versus Wade, granted women the right to an abortion. The court's decision was based on a woman's right to privacy. In other words, the Supreme Court recognized the woman's right to choose what to do with her life and body. Beyond the moral question of an abortion being right or wrong, Roe v. Wade represented a huge step forward in the recognition of equal rights for women. As the Cold War rolled on, we saw a continued influence on popular culture of the angry man phenomenon that I described earlier. Punk music in the late 1970s and rap music in the late 1980s and early 1990s reflected deep frustrations with society and loud demands for change. The British group the Sex Pistols, which you see on the left, sang songs entitled Anarchy in the UK and God Save the Queen, She Ain't No Human Being. Another punk group called The Clash shouted out lyrics such as London's burning with boredom now and I'm so tired with the USA, a song denouncing the strong cultural influence of the United States on Great Britain at the time. Rap groups such as Public Enemy and NWA denounced the wrongs of early 1990s city life in New York City and Los Angeles. Public Enemy's frustration with the lack of positive African American role models in society was evident in their Burn Hollywood Burn, as was NWA's criticism of the LAPD and their famous F the Police. As you reflect on the impact of Cold War society on life today, keep in mind that the radical advancements in individual rights and social equality that the United States experienced during these years were critical influences on present-day society. Thinking about the conflict between communism and capitalism seems foreign to many of us today, but for over 2 generations, most of the world societies were forced to align themselves with one or the other system. Next time, we will concentrate on how the Cold War affected other parts of the globe, such as Latin America and Africa, and how it finally came to an end in 1991. Take care and have a good week.